A mile west of Homestead is this little grave. People used to wonder, there are all kinds of theories. Who was buried there? Well, according to one theory, there was a family going through on the train. Their daughter died, and so they stopped the train and buried her here right alongside the railroad tracks. Another theory was there was a group going through in covered wagons. The little girl died, and they stopped the wagons and buried her here beside the road. Actually, the little girl's folks ran the stagecoach stop on the other side of that highway. This is Highway 6. You've all gone along it from time to time. They had the stagecoach stop. They had a dozen people there, and they changed horses. And little Mary died, and they buried her in a cemetery that was in this area. And then when the Rock Island Railroad was going through, they wanted to go right through that point because it was a high point, and they were going to have to do a lot of filling, but they would do less if they could go there. So they agreed to move all the graves to another cemetery, which they did, all but this one here, and that was in 1860 when they went through. So that grave has been there ever since, and you can see that the stone, August 19th, 1854, a little Mary Wright. Why her grave was continued there, and no one knows. Maybe it's because her folks were right across the road. But then right next to this, back in 1903, there was some man working for the Havana colonies. He didn't belong. He was just an employee. And he had the idea that he was a sort of a derelict. He wanted to know what a railroad wreck would look like. So he pulled the spikes out of the track. And when the Rocky Mountain Limited went through there, at that time it went through at midnight. When it went through, of course, the tracks spread. And this huge train with all those coaches, diners, Pullmans, went down the embankment. Fortunately, it was spring, March. It was muddy, and the cars went down rather slowly. They dug into the mud. Nobody was killed. Unfortunately, the engineer was scalded badly, and he did die. But that was the only death. And it's amazing. Nobody can understand how there could be such a terrible accident without any major injuries. They finally caught the man, and he was taken sentenced to prison. I had an awful time finding out the story. I summoned Art Dreyer, who was a plumber here, kind of a character. He said, well, I remember when that wreck happened. And I said, well, when was it? Well, he said, I was just learning to read then. And I talked to people in the man, and nobody could give me much. I can't remember where I got the lead. And finally, someone said it was in March 1903, I believe it was. So I went to the newspapers and I found the story, and then the Marengo, Iowa County History had a big account of it, and so I got the story there. But when you're going past this grave on Highway 6, just take a look off to the right, to the north, and you'll see this grave. And as you go a little bit further down to the bottom of this ravine, or the hill, you'll see what a big fill there is on the Rock Island Railroad, and that's where the cars toppled down that dark night in 1903. Well, it's kind of an interesting story. The steamboat, the first one got here June 20th, 1841. The workmen on the old Capitol could see down the river, and the call went out, the steamboat's a-coming. And of course everybody rushed down to the Iowa River, at the Iowa Avenue Bridge. That was Pleasant Arthur's ferry there. That's where the National Highway crossed the Iowa River. And so the steamboat came in. There were eight men passengers in the crew, and there was great festivity. They had banquets for Captain Jones, and he promised to come back, but he never did. But there was always great hopes that there would be traffic on the Mississippi River. They did feel that this was their one way for 4 months of the year when they could get merchandise from the outside world very inexpensively, and they could ship things back inexpensively. But the ripple didn't come back, but on April 20th, 1842, the next year, 10 months later, another steamboat came up, the Rock River, and that was, the captain was Captain Thayer, and he was a jovial sort, and there was great excitement, and he got there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he invited the leading citizens to take a trip that afternoon, excursion. So that afternoon, I guess there were about 150 men and women, all dressed up in their best, taking this excursion up to the state ford. That's some 10 or 12 miles up the Iowa River. And I just think what a marvelous trip that would have been. I can't imagine how anything, that's as good as the Delta Queen or the Mississippi Queen. You got no bridges, no dams, just a verdant landscape with the bluffs up above the river, and with the smoke coming out of the chimney. It was really a delightful trip. Well, anyhow, incidentally, when that first steamboat, the Ripple, got there was all this excitement, but on the other side of the river were some of the Indians from Pawashek's village that were still around, and they sat in dismal silence watching the big fire canoe of the white man. So it was quite a shock to them when they saw that boat coming up the Iowa River. There were 4 or 5 other boats that came up off and on. There was one boat that was built in Iowa City. It always seemed that something happened. They caught fire. One boat, the Maid of Iowa, which was made at Augusta, Iowa, and launched in the Skunk River, came up with a lot of freight and passengers. And on the way back, she had a full load of freight, and she was hauling a keel boat filled with grain. And on the way down, the keel boat was grounded, and the current swung it around broadside, and then it split open, and they lost 1,000 bushels of corn. So there's always something happened that blocked it. I could have told him it wouldn't be very practical, because in 1920, in September, my friend and I paddled a canoe down the Iowa to the Cedar, down the Cedar in Iowa to the Mississippi at New Boston, Illinois, down the Mississippi to Keokuk. I know that first day, again and again, we were pulling a canoe off of the sandbar. That's how shallow the water was. But it was practical in the spring, and they had great hopes, but it just didn't work out. The railroad, of course, came, and then the stagecoach started in 1841, and that was a boom, because they had regular stages to Davenport, to Muscatine, to Dubuque. They had them going in all directions, and that was a great help. Then the next transportation, of course, as I say, was the plug railroad, the little one that went up to Elmira and south to Riverside, Kelowna, through Lone Tree. Then the Irving came along in 1903 and 4. Started service in August 1904. It made the loop around the well, came up Capitol Street to Washington, east on Washington to Clinton, south on Clinton to College, and then west right through what is now Old Capitol Mall. So it ran every hour from 5:30 in the morning till midnight, and it was a great boom. Students used to have to go to Elmira and change cars, and it would take 2 or 3 hours. On this, they could get to Cedar Rapids in half an hour. It was the building of North Liberty, because it gave them service in the days when there was no paving, just mud roads. They made 53 stops between Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, so all that area had good service in Iowa City. It was just like a streetcar to Iowa City.